We're almost time to get started. All right, we're gonna get started now. Alienation Freedom will be next. Did anybody else come in? Hey, Rocket Surgeon's here. Yeah, Alienation and Freedom. Yeah. It's in the thing. All right, we're on section 3. What we're doing here is we're going through James's little bit of his history and stuff, and we're on section 3 of his history. By the mid-1940s, James felt a need to synthesize the work that he had done while in the United States. James thinks that the black community are the revolutionary subject, the most advanced proletariat in the United States at this point. He's upside down now. By the mid-1940s, James felt a need to synthesize the work that he had done while in the United States. He had not written a book since leaving England, an urge to pull the pieces together, strengthened following a discussion in 1945 with Richard Wright, who had just publicly broken with the Communist Party and was at the time correcting the proofs of black boys. I have been wavering about writing a book, James notes in a letter, but I shall hesitate no longer. By the time they have recovered from his autobiographical novel, I shall hit them across the eye with a historical study. His ambition was to write a book that would do for the understanding of American culture that the world revolution had done for the critique of Stalinism, that what the black Jacobins had done for the Haitian Revolution, and what boundaries bound beyond and boundary was to do for cricket. Some years later, a work at once comprehensive, definitive, and interesting to the average reader. But after years of research into the history of slave revolts and abolitionism, his study remained unfinished, nor was the play he drafted about Harriet Tubman accepted for production. In early 1950, he prepared a lengthy proposal for a book under the work title Notes on American Civilization. It would integrate his historical investigation, his appreciation for American literature, and thoughts about contemporary industrial societies. This too remained only a rough sketch, the magnificent ruins of his cultural and historical conceptions. The manuscript alternated between brilliant passages and extensive quotations from primary sources, but was never integrated into a finished book. Only at the very end of the American sojourn, while being held on Ellis Island under the threat of deportation, did James finish a short volume, Mariners, Renegades, and Castaways, 1953, a critical study of Herman Melville. It bears little discernible relations to his previous writings from the American period, and that discontinuity was almost certainly intentional. It was published as part of his appeal for citizenship, and the autobiographical concluding statements emphasized his literary prominence, not his political activity. Perhaps James had hoped that the work of literary criticism might help him pass as an ordinary American intellectual. The book drew on the American civilization draft, yet Mariners, while much more polished, lacked the conceptual sweep of the earlier projects, without gaining much from its concentration on Melville. It is perhaps the oddest volume James published, certainly at least exemplary of his profoundly historical imagination. At the same time, it was insufficiently formalist in its critical approach to find much of an audience among literary critics. It apparently got no reviews at the time of publication, and has left no trace whatsoever in subsequent Melville's commentary. What James wanted to write throughout his American years was historical narrative. For the most part, what he actually produced was Marxist theory. Until 1950, his most extensive work was the Nevada Document, a tutorial guide of Hegel's Science of Logic with political implications, now published as Notes on Dialectics. And on 1950, the year he drafted American Civilization, James produced State Capitalism, World Revolution, in which his critique of Trotskyism reached its culmination in a work he later referred to as his masterpiece. Each document responded to what James saw as a stage of profound cultural crises within capitalism, the unceasing drive for industrial concentration and centralization. Every larger units of manufacture increasingly automated, striving for heightened productivity by intensifying the division of labor, made for the incredible growth of economic outputs. Yet it also wasted human abilities and promised freedom, and at the end to want, while narrowing the exercise of individual development. The labor process remained outside the control of those who carried on the labor. There might be a democracy in politics, but none in production. Although the capitalist control of the conditions of production had been challenged by the industrial unionism of the 1930s and 1940s, the labor bureaucracy increasingly limited its demands to the sphere of consumption. This was what Marx had described as alienation in the Economic and Philosophical Manuscripts of 1844, which the Johnston Forest Group published in English. And in James's vision of the prospect of socialist revolution, the demand for the abolition of alienation was growing, if not always voiced in explicitly socialist terms. The process of capitalist accumulation and concentration was global. So too would be the resistance to it. But in the course of his sojourning in the United States, James came to see the Americans as being especially fitted to grasp the potential for a new social order, in which, as Marx had said of communism, the full development of all required the full development of each. And Grimshaw was brilliantly summed up this tendency in James's thinking apropos of his American Civilization project. James found in the New World the conditions for a fundamental revolution in human relations of a size and scope commensurated with changes in the organization of production. He believed that the movement of the modern world was towards integration, towards the reconstruction of human subjects, or what he called, quote, the creation of man as an integral human being. But by this he meant that the search for new forms, the extension of artistic premises, was motivated by people's desire to found the new society in which they could bring into contact the separate elements of their lives. James anticipated that in seeking to integrate lives fragmented by the division of labor, the mass of the American people, unburdened by Europe's past, could create new kinds of political associations and expressions. Politics would no longer be separate from everyday life, which this statement, Grimshaw, contingently presents what is essentially a definitive about James's political, historical, and theoretical efforts throughout the years of his life, throughout the years he lived in the United States. It was also the conception shared by the Johnston Forest tendency. Hence, it seemed peculiar that she also remarks, aside from, oh my gosh, I got a restriction. Hold on a second. Let me do this. Aside from the two conventional political documents James published on the American Revolution in 1944, there were few hints of this enormous but largely personal project of studying American life and culture. In his voluminous journalistic contribution to to the debate within the Trotskyist movement during the 1940s. The present collection, along with numerous of other writings by James and his group, abundantly documented that, far from being a, quote, largely personal project, the work James attempts to synthesize in American civilization had been at the center of his revolutionary activities, a public concern for more than a decade. Hey, Rocket. The social need for, and Carrot, how you doing? The social need for a sense of completeness or integration in the conduct of life extended beyond the point of production. Although James, as a Marxist, always returned his focus to the labor process. Beyond this historical and strictly political efforts, there was in James's work during the American period a cultural dimension that Paul Buell and Annie Grimshaw had sought to emphasize. Their accounts present this culture concern as something emerging in the final years of staying in American civilization, 1950, and The Mariners, Renegades, and Castaways, 1953. Yeah, it wasn't approved, everybody. Yay. However, as early as the review of Native Son in 1940, he approaches the question of how aesthetic and social activity might be related. The artist, by methods compounded of conscious logic and his own intuition, observes society and experiences life. He comes to his conclusion and embodies them in character, scene, and dramatic situations. According to the depth of his penetration, the sweep of his net, his capacity to integrate and produce, he writes his novel, paints his picture, and composes his symphony. Psychologists, historians, politicians, or revolutionaries draw on his own experience, see symbols, parallelism, depth, and perspective unsuspected by the creator. The artist can see the truth and nothing but the truth, but no one can accept him to see the whole truth. Following the period covered by the selection in the present volume, James' attention returned to culture matters, considered now not with regard to the mystery of creation, but in light of political roles art might have the crises of global capitalism. By the 1950s, a whole field of discussion about mass culture had grown up. But James, in contrast with these mostly hostile commentaries, was fascinated by the way these forms sought to acknowledge social conflict and mere reality, where others, Marxists, looked upon popular entertainment as contributing to the stabilization of the crises. James discerns an immense force of aspiration and rage in mass culture. For instance, the sudden popularity of gangster films and the Dick Tracy comic strips during the Depression impressed him as expressions of desperate individualism, charged with the desire for violence against the official society. The vast audience for radio serials, soap operas, revealed the deep need, especially among women, for some kind of reflection and affirmation of day-to-day existence. And the Hollywood stars system whereby James wrote, a certain select few individuals symbolized in their films' existence and their private and public existence, the revolt against the general conditions. Likewise endorsed and displaced the starving for individual freedom and expression that was ingrained in American culture, but was increasingly frustrated by industrial society. Works designed for entertainment had to satisfy the diverse mass audience. Furthermore, they were created in more or less industrial conditions by large businesses and enterprises, i.e. the studios and the networks. The popular culture James wrote about was very much a product of capitalism. In this respect, he concurred unknowingly with Adorno and Horkheimer with the regard to the commodification of culture, and to, like their dialectic of enlightenment, James' notes on American civilization recognizes the degree of commodity between these cultures, products, and totalitarian states. At one point, he even treats the show trial as a debased and manipulative form of mass culture drama. In either case, in the popular art of commodified leisure, or in modern dictatorship, a decisive force of repression operates. The conflict between labor and capital must be denied or dispersed. The workers' effort to control production and to develop their own individual abilities must be subordinated to capital's demand for heightened productivity. In the lecture delivered in Paris in 1954, Popular Culture and the Cultural Tradition, James reiterated these theses argued in American civilization. It was the Depression of 1929 which opened the split in the national consciousness in the United States, and thereby beginning a decline in the quality of popular arts. Griffith and Chaplin had been the epic and lyric poets, respectively, of the common person. In their films, they could take on such matters as labor conflict, unemployment, and race, albeit in the thoroughly reactionary fashion, as in Griffith's Birth of the Nation. That was a very white supremacist thing. This mass popular audience of Griffin and the earlier Chaplin lived in the atmosphere of social freedom and absence of traditional restraint, characteristics of the growth of the United States, said James. The Depression heightened social tension, reflectively splitting the audience so that certain topics became dangerous. Today, so tense is the relation between the different classes, and so highly organized their representative institutions, that immense area of social experience have no opportunity to be presented on screen. In this respect, oh my gosh, here we go. Achilles and Shakespeare had infinitely greater freedom than any modern film director. James' intention was not to become the end. Oh my gosh, I don't know this word. Charlie Chaplin, I think. Yeah. Remember, like, the bourgeois utilizes circus and bread to keep the American drive, the American dream going. So that's why the media and sources are through the capital things in order to seek the propaganda for like capitalism to be the greatest system in the world and American individualism. There's no other country like ours. We're the most free, you know what I mean? That like American conceptualism, hyper individualism, you know? Media is used for that. And I'm going to get denied another restriction, I bet. All right, I'm looking up this word real quick. Imagine if, like, the workers that are in charge of the media own their own means of production and actually overthrew those fucking bourgeois. There it is. I think that's it. Yeah. Of course not. Pronunciation.
Esthetician. It is esthetician, meaning a licensed skincare professional who specializes in cosmetic. Okay, esthetician. Nor was he specially concerned with advocating for particular forms of art. Rather, his interest laid in the responsibility that the mass media and popular culture might serve as a form of communication, however distorted within the class. He saw such, skincare, I know. He saw such exchange as a decisive aspect of class independence. What happened in the revolution, he wrote in 1962, is that the class, for the first time, finds itself free to think its own thoughts and give some concrete form of its own experience accumulated over the generations. In Marx's activity, James thought should seek to foster such communication. In this respect, it is important to take notice. Great, I wasn't approved. To take notice of a project discussed by James's and some friends near the end of World War II, a biography of Richard Wright by Constance Webb, to whom James was married at one time, recalls the plans that James, Wright, Ralph Ellison, and others made to start a magazine. Wright proposed the name American Page and drew up the prospectus Webb describes the intended range of the publication. There would be no preaching in the articles or feature stories, but an attempt to depict that what a lack of balance living gave rise to in all American mob violence, casual cruelty, adolescent posturing, crime, race hate, gang life, drunkenness, wild fads, relentlessness, cheap movies, abortion, that's not abortion, that's adoration, adoration, cheap pathos, cheap morals, cheap art, cheap journalism, cheap aspiration, and inescapable loneliness. More specifically, there would be fiction, articles, essays, poetry, cartoons, profiles of individuals who lived the American way, such as Frank Sinatra, Gene Krupp, Francis Farmer, survey on race tension, popular writings, excerpts from novels which reveal the American scene, studies of crime and criminals, black and white. What would be the primary assumption of such a publication? It was to be that the black problem was the problem of all minorities, and the problem of antisocial individuals were but phases of one overall national cultural problem, a lag in consciousness, and a primitive expression of personalities caught in the industrial society, which demands were far beyond the emotional capacity of the people to contain or resolve them. American Page only reached a stage of a prospectus, but the Johnson Forest tendency, after leaving the Trotskyist movement, launched a similar project. Its newspaper, Correspondence, encouraged workers, housewives, students, and others to write about what concerns them in their lives and in society at large. Members of the group would listen to discussions and remarks from people around them, and then write them up in short articles. A related effort was the organization series of pamphlets and books, Indignant Heart, a black auto worker's life story, A Woman's Place, reflection of working women on their role in society and at home. Artie cuts out the narrative of a student rebellion, and Punch Out, an incidental and analytical treatment of factory life and union bureaucracy. These projects, all encouraged by James and consistent with his emphasis on the developing the means for, quote, the class to think its own thoughts and to give some concrete forms to its own experience accumulated over the generations, were designed as interventions in the spheres of popular culture. The pamphlets were small enough to fit in the shirt pocket. The book, Charles Denby's Ignorant Heart, or the latter political statements of Face Reality, were published in the format of mass market paperbacks and were priced cheaply. This was, in effect, an attempt to slip into the mass culture mainstream. A passage from the correspondent displays the group's attitude and showed where it's directed its attention. From the stories that we get every day from the shops, we can see a new form of struggle emerging. It never seems to be carried to its complete end, yet its existence is continuous. The real essence of this struggle and the ultimate goal is a better life, a new society, the emergence of an individual as a human being, each scrap with the boss, each manifestation with things as they are, all attend to smash down the old and help the new emerge. This is the struggle to establish here and now a new culture of workers' culture. It is this that we must be extremely sensitive to. We must watch with an eagle's eye every change or indications of the things that these changes reflect. The whole effort somewhat resembled a premature form of new life, culture, practice from the 1960s. Likewise, such as post-Trotskyist political documents of state capitalism and world revolution, and facing reality bore similarities to letters. New Life thinking. Not by accident either. The young Marxist writings were a decisive influence on both. But in the 1950s, an intrinsic commitment to the revolutionary perspective must have coaxed it uneasily with a grim awareness that the economy and the politics of the day deny the short-term prospects for change. Someone who knew James during his American years, referred to his "fuck you" quote unquote theory of history. Every time a worker says "fuck you," a revolution is about to begin. Only much later would such an uncompromising optimism appear heroic, even prophetic. In the meantime, James was driven out of the country. Rediscovering his writings now, one noticed how often James views things from a theoretical height. To borrow the phrase of Trotsky that James repeats throughout his tribute. And he had a clear appreciation of how much his own vantage owed to the collective work of the parties and groups to which he belongs. By means of their associated labor, he could survey, quote, a new field, a new prairie, a new landscape, seldom explored by other Marxists in the United States. But James did not dwell entirely in the upper regions. The writings from this period, from his years as an underground man, also suggest that James tried to track the progress deep below the visible terrain of what Marx once called the old mole, the force of social revolution which disappears from sight for years at a time, then pops up out from his undermining burrows, when and where least expected. Scott McClemmy. And that might be it, everybody. Told you it's going to be a very short read today. I'm going to go look ahead on the other read, but I think this is it. Let's find out. Yep, this is it. We're done.
So that was awesome. So I was enjoying. I could see how he got pushed out of America with those views because the government would not want him around.
Yeah. Thanks everybody. I told you it's gonna be a short writing. So we are gonna if you're in the server, it's not the first alienation, it's the next one up. It's in underneath the tabs. It's underneath the tabs on here, let me get it again.
It's under Prince Fanon and Lynn tagged it. So if you guys look under books and then under Prince Fanon, you will see Lynn's tag.
Yeah, I haven't read this book. Let's see here. I read most of Fanon's work, but there's some stuff I have not read. This one, everybody. That's the right book right there. That's the one we're going to read. Not this one. Not this one. Not this one. This one. Oh, come on. This one. And it's the second one up. Frantz Fanon, Alienation and Freedom. We're going to figure out what it's all about. It's about lots of pages long. We could look at some stuff here real quick. It's about, well, let's see here. Let me go back to it. It's going to be a long book. But I read on here Black Reconstruction, and that was an 800-page book. This one, it's around 700 and something. So what we got here, look at the table of contents. We have many parts. We have part one with the theater. We're going to do general instructions, general introductions, Fanon's Revolutionary Playwrights, The Drowning Eye, Parallel Hands. Part two, Psychiatric Writings, Fanon's Revolutionary Psychiatry. That's part two. There's a lot there. And then we're going to go into, that's pretty long. then we'll go into part 3, political writings. Introduction to Demoralized Foreign Legion, Algerian Independence and Everyday Reality, National Independence and the Possible Outcome, Algerian and French Crises, Algerian Conflict and African Anti-Colonialism, The Democratic Revolution. Once again, the reason for a precondition, Algerian Revolutionary Consciousness. So there's that, and that's a long one. And then part 4 is published writings, it looks like. And then part 5 would be Frantz Fanon's Library and Life. So it looks like an interesting book. I've never read it before. So we'll see how we do. So, and again, it's where Joe said it is.
And and then like Rocket Surgeon would like to request maybe for the next book, James's Every Cook Can Govern.
Every Cook Can Govern?
Yeah, Lynn says we don't think we have it yet, but
we don't.
we'll look for it tomorrow.
Yeah, I was thinking, we can go back to that. I was thinking to do Eric Williams's Slavery and Capitalism, or it might be the other way around, Capitalism and Slavery, you know? So, and then we can go on to that.
Okay, cool.
So I eventually wanted to read that book. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, I'm sorry it wasn't not too long of a thing, but I don't want to get into this other book yet. I'd rather like look through it and check it out and see what it's like first, and then go ahead, because I've been doing that a little bit lately, reading checking it out and stuff like that, you know. So I want to do that at least. And I'm sorry we missed the 5 o'clock one with the historical materialism.
It's all right. It's all right.
I was asleep, kind of. You know. All right, everybody. Thank you for being here. Tomorrow we start that new Frantz Fanon book.